Two men are dragging a sledge across Antarctic ice. It's 1913. They are hundreds of miles from safety, their supplies are gone, and they have one source of food left: their own sled dogs. So they eat the dogs, all of them, including the livers. And then something starts going wrong that neither man can explain. Their skin begins to peel. Not flaking, peeling, coming away in sheets from their hands and faces. Their hair falls out. They become dizzy, confused, unable to think straight. One of them dies out there on the ice. The other survives, barely, and later describes the soles of his feet detaching from his body in one piece. They weren't just starving. The leading explanation for what happened to them is that they had eaten something a human being is not built to eat, and it was quietly destroying them from the inside. Which brings us to a question you have never once asked, despite answering it every single day of your life. You eat cow, chicken, pig, sheep, fish. You've eaten meat since you were a child, so why have you never eaten a lion, a wolf, a tiger, a fox, a hawk, an orca? We hunt animals. We're the most effective hunters this planet has ever produced. We killed off most of the large predators that ever threatened us, and then we didn't eat them. Out of thousands of human cultures, almost none has ever built a food tradition around meat eaters. That is an extraordinarily consistent decision about something nobody ever sat down and decided. Most people assume it's a taboo, just one of those things we find a bit off. That's the surface. Underneath it are four separate biological reasons, stacked on top of each other. And by the end, you'll realize your body has known all of them for far longer than we've had science. Let's start with the obvious question. Could you eat a lion? Yes. Predator meat isn't poisonous the way a death cap mushroom is. A bite of lion won't kill you. People have eaten wolf, bear, seal, alligator, shark. The option has always been there. So it isn't that we can't, it's that we almost never have. And the first reason is the coldest one. It's just arithmetic. Energy moves up a food chain terribly. As a rough rule, only about 1/10 of the energy at one level makes it to the next. Grass captures sunlight. A deer eats grass, and most of that energy is burned simply keeping the deer alive and moving. A lion eats the deer, and the same tax gets charged again, which makes a predator an absurdly expensive way to store calories. A big lion needs something like 15 to 20 pounds of meat a day just to exist. Every predator you have ever seen is the compressed remains of an enormous number of other animals. Now stand on that landscape as a prehistoric human. You're hungry. You have two options. Option 1, hunt a deer. It runs away. It has no weapons. If you fail, you're hungry. Option 2, hunt a lion. It does not run away. It comes towards you. It is an animal built from nose to tail for killing things. If you fail, you don't go hungry. You die. So the risk is wildly higher. And here's the part people miss. The reward is worse. Predators are lean. Prey animals graze constantly and store fat, which is exactly why we hunted them. Predators eat in unpredictable bursts and carry far less. They're muscle, sinew, and bone. And lean meat, on its own, is close to useless for survival. You can eat pure lean protein until you're full and still deteriorate because without fat alongside it, your body can't extract enough usable energy. People have starved to death with full stomachs doing exactly that. So, a predator is the most dangerous thing on the landscape to hunt, and one of the least nourishing things to eat. There was never a version of that trade worth making. Not once, anywhere, in 300,000 years. That explains why we never built traditions around it. It doesn't explain the poisoning. For that, you need to understand what a predator's body actually is. It's an archive. Here's the mechanism, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Toxins enter a food chain at the bottom. Traces of heavy metals in water, chemicals absorbed by plankton and plants. Tiny amounts, harmless. A small fish eats thousands of those organisms, absorbing a little from each. Still fine. A bigger fish eats thousands of those small fish, and the dose concentrates. A large predatory fish eats thousands of those, and by the top of the chain, the concentration isn't a bit higher. It can be many thousands of times higher than the water it all came from. And these toxins don't get flushed out. They lock into fat tissue and stay there for the animal's whole life. This isn't a theory. In the 1960s, researchers worked out why bald eagles were collapsing around the Great Lakes. Nobody was poisoning eagles. The eagles were eating fish, and those fish carried DDT accumulated from everything beneath them. By the time it reached the top, the concentration was enough to thin the eagle's eggshells until the eggs broke under the weight of the parent sitting on them. The eagles weren't killed by what they ate. They were killed by everything their food had ever eaten, and you already live with a smaller version of this. You've been told to be careful with tuna, specifically tuna, not sardines. Not because tuna is dirty, but because tuna is a large predatory fish high on a chain, and its mercury levels are high enough that health authorities genuinely monitor them and advise pregnant women to limit it. Now scale that up to a land predator that has spent 20 years eating other meat eaters. That animal is a walking lifetime of accumulation. Then there's what's living inside it. Predators eat raw flesh constantly, including the raw flesh of animals that were themselves infected. That makes them superb hosts for parasites. Above all, a small worm called trichinella, which lives in the muscle of carnivores. Eat infected meat that hasn't been cooked thoroughly, and the larvae hatch in your intestine, then migrate out into your own muscle tissue. Fever, swelling, severe pain, historically sometimes fatal. Bear is one of the most documented sources of trichinella in the world, and bear is one of the very few large predators humans have eaten with any regularity, which is why every culture that ate bear had an absolute rule about cooking it through. Not for flavor, because the alternative was brutal. Now, the reason those men's skin came off, it's a vitamin. Vitamin A is essential. You'd die without it. But unlike vitamin C, which you flush out when you have too much, vitamin A is fat-soluble. Your body can't dump the excess. It stores it in the liver, which means every animal that eats other animals is stockpiling vitamin A in its liver over its entire life. And in predators at the very top, the amount stored is genuinely extraordinary. The most famous example is polar bear. Polar bear liver contains such a high concentration that a single meal of it can cause acute vitamin A poisoning in an adult human. The symptoms are exactly what happened on that ice: severe headache, dizziness, hair loss, and skin peeling away in sheets. And here's the part I find remarkable. Arctic peoples knew this, not from chemistry, from experience, passed down. There is long-standing Inuit knowledge that you do not eat polar bear liver, and in some places it was fed to no one, not even the dogs. They didn't know what a vitamin was. They knew what happened. The explorers didn't have that knowledge. They ate husky liver over and over for weeks, and the leading explanation for what happened to them is that they were poisoned by the accumulated vitamin A in the animals they were eating to survive. Even that isn't the strangest part of this story, because there's one more defense, and it's operating in you at this exact moment. Disgust. Researchers who study food psychology have found something consistent. Humans have an instinctive aversion to eating carnivores. It shows up in children before anyone teaches it to them. It shows up across cultures with no contact with each other. The psychologist Paul Rozin spent decades on the disgust response and found people categorize carnivore meat as aversive at a level below conscious reasoning. You feel it before you think it, and the evolutionary explanation is straightforward, if grim. Ancestors who felt nothing about eating a predator sometimes ate a toxic liver, or a parasite load, or spent enormous risk on an animal that couldn't feed them. Some of them died. Ancestors who found the whole idea off, who couldn't explain why but didn't fancy it, avoided all of that without ever understanding any of it. Right now, if I ask you to picture eating a thick, juicy wolf steak, something in you recoils before your brain has finished forming the image. That isn't culture. That's a few 100,000 years of your ancestors surviving exactly the situations that killed everybody else. Your disgust is inherited memory. It's the summary of a lesson, with the reasoning stripped out. But the exceptions prove the whole thing, and they're worth noticing. We do eat some predators. We eat predatory fish carefully. We eat alligator, squid, octopus, all ferocious hunters. We've eaten bear and seal. What those have in common is that they sit just low enough on the chain, or get eaten rarely enough, that the accumulated load stays survivable. So the rule was never eat a predator. The rule is that the higher up you go, the more of the world below is concentrated inside the animal. And at the very top, in the lions and wolves and orcas, that concentration becomes something a human body simply isn't built to process, which brings it back to your plate. Every animal you have ever eaten sat low enough on the food chain that the chemical load was survivable, the parasite risk manageable, and your ancient disgust response never fired. Chicken, cow, sheep, pig, sardine, all of them plant eaters or near enough. That isn't a coincidence, and it isn't culinary taste. Your entire food tradition expedition is the output of a survival calculation your ancestors ran for thousands of generations, without instruments, without chemistry, without ever writing a word of it down. They couldn't measure mercury, they'd never heard of a parasite or a vitamin, so evolution encoded the answer the only way it can. It made it feel wrong, and you are here, eating what you eat, because for a very long time, that worked.